Yes, on this channel, if we became known for something, it was for telling stories about the greatest battles in Formula 1 history. This is thanks to our series of legendary rivalries, which today, if Skyline Racing is what it is, it's largely because of that series that you, my dear audience, also responded to so well at the time. But we've talked about many rivalries on this channel, yet we've never ranked which ones we consider the best rivalries in Formula 1 history. Which ones do we consider? Do they have the best battles, the most intense, the most controversial? Why are they considered legendary rivalries? And a long list of other things that honestly hadn't crossed my mind to do until today. So we're going to make our own ranking of rivalries. But keep in mind, this won't be a ranking of the best rivalries as the world sees them, but rather a ranking based on my personal appreciation, where I'll include how I first learned about the rivalry, how I relived it by watching it again, or recapping it, or seeing it for the first time, having seen it in replays. So overall, this will be a ranking based on my personal appreciation and particular tastes. So you'll probably find a rivalry in this ranking in positions you might not think it deserves, but in the end, this list is about my personal opinion. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the top 7 legendary rivalries in the history of Formula 1. The rivalry that takes the number 7 spot on this list is the one that, before the battle, we all know was considered the best in the history of Formula 1. It was regarded as the mother of all battles. This rivalry was between two Williams team drivers and took place during the years 1986 and 1987, where both drivers engaged in a fierce battle. Where, as always, when you have a car capable of winning Formula 1 world titles, everything else takes a back seat. The only thing that matters is going all out to win the driver's crown. As historical context, in the 1986 season, the Grove team signed who was considered at that time to be one of the best drivers in the world, the Brazilian Nelson Piquet, who had been Formula 1 world champion in 1981 and 1983. He negotiated directly with the team owner, Frank Williams, with the only requirement being, apart from a sky-high salary, to be treated as the #1 driver. That is, he would be the team's priority, all the upgrades would go first to his car, and his teammate would be relegated to the role of supporting driver. So, with a fast car and no one to challenge him, Nelson Piquet should have been on his way to his 3rd world title. But before the season started, Frank Williams suffered a serious accident that left him quadriplegic, so he had to step down from his duties at Williams. And it was precisely the year when Nigel Mansell and his unique driving style began to shine. After Frank Williams' accident, Patrick Head took charge of the team and did not honor the original agreement that Nelson Piquet and Frank Williams had reached, allowing Nigel Mansell to directly compete for the driver's title against Nelson Piquet, which led to one of the wildest rivalries seen in those years, a legendary battle that was full of on-track tensions, psychological warfare, insults, and a power struggle. As I mentioned, this led to one of Formula 1's most memorable battles. And that's the context of the duel between Nigel Mansell and Nelson Piquet. And I'm sure that watching this, and those who have been watching Formula 1 for many more years than I have, will wonder how the hell I put this rivalry so low in this ranking, and there's a very simple and straightforward explanation: I haven't seen it. Yes, I know the context, and obviously I've seen some individual races and I know the story, but I haven't been able to go back and watch all the races from those 2 particular seasons. This is the reason why, even though I respect the historical context of this rivalry, I can't put it higher on this list, but I wouldn't have included it without having a good reason. And brothers, gentlemen, it's my pleasure to inform you that legendary Formula 1 rivalries are coming back for one last bonus dance that will focus on this rivalry, and it's obviously legendary. And it was a complete offense not to have told it at the right time. So for now, we'll have to settle for this, and we'll leave this top spot for the battle between Nelson Piquet and Nigel Mansell, with the promise that soon you'll see a bonus episode of Legendary Rivalries from Formula 1. In 2021, we witnessed one of the fiercest and most legendary battles in the history of the category, where, as context, we were coming off 7 years of dominance, a streak of 6 world titles in 7 years by Sir Lewis Hamilton. And what about when, for 2021, the plans to introduce a new technical regulation were postponed because of the pandemic that hit the world in 2020, and the category had to have 1 more year of development for the cars that were originally going to leave Formula 1. In 2020, everyone thought that 2021 would be another year of dominance for the Silver Arrows and Lewis Hamilton, until one of the strongest rivals the Briton has ever faced in his entire Formula 1 career appeared. Well, Red Bull stepped up and said enough was enough, and with the RB16 and Max Verstappen as their contending driver, they engaged in one of the most legendary battles ever seen in the history of Formula One. From the first race to the last of that year, they pushed each other to the limit in their battle where both shared victories, both had very controversial moments, and above all, they practically collided every time they met on track. In very few seasons do you find a rivalry this fierce and intense, one that exploded after the accident at the Silverstone Grand Prix, where it was no longer just an all-out war between Hamilton and Verstappen. With social media being completely incendiary and where the team principals attacked each other without any mercy, they even made it to the last race of the year, tied in points, where fate's scriptwriter wanted both of them to arrive under equal conditions for the last race and the championship decider. Which, yes, was just as controversial with what we all already know happened at that Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. But in general terms, 2021 ended up becoming the battle of a generational talent who wanted the Formula One throne, and a champion who wanted the title that would make him the greatest champion in numbers in the history of the top category of motorsport. This, in summary, is what 2021 brought us. And it was expected that this battle and the profiles of Hamilton and Verstappen would have the potential to be the greatest rivalry in history. Just imagine if both had had the same competitive car, the kind of fight they would have given us in the following years. But in the end, this couldn't happen because Mercedes' competitiveness faded after 2021 while Red Bull dominated the years 2022, 2023 and fought for the titles. At least with Verstappen in 2024 and 2025 only losing last year's title, so in terms of competitiveness, Mercedes and Hamilton were far behind Red Bull and Max Verstappen. But of course, whenever both of them were on track, even today, with Hamilton driving for Ferrari, there always ends up being fireworks in this battle, so you always know that when these two meet on a circuit, something is going to happen. And look, I know that many people rate this rivalry more highly than I do right now, but if I rank this rivalry this low on my personal list, it's simply because their rivalry has always been characterized by the same thing. They meet on track and they crash, that's it. This is basically the summary of 90% of their battles. In 2021 in Imola, they meet at the start and crash. In Silverstone, Hamilton sends him into the wall at Copse. In Italy, Hamilton pushes him off the track, Verstappen tries to force his way in, and guess what? It all ends in a crash and both retire. They get to Brazil, Verstappen blatantly pushes Hamilton off the track during an overtaking attempt. And this is just to mention a few of the moments, not to mention the many other times they've ended up crashing over the years. Not to mention Max Verstappen's reckless driving at Jeddah and the controversial end to the 2021 season. These are the reasons why personally I don't hold this rivalry in such high regard. But it's true. It's legendary in every sense of the word, but the fact that they can't even go side by side, that they can't go a single day without pushing each other off the track, and that 90% of the time they end up meeting on the track, it always ends exactly the same way. Personally, I'm tired of it. It even got on my nerves during that 2021 season. Obviously, I enjoyed the intensity and the controversy, but always seeing the same result whenever they met made the rivalry less enjoyable for me. But if you want to learn about this rivalry, our episode on historic seasons dedicated to the 2021 season will help you better understand the context of this battle I'm talking about. So let me know your opinion, but at least for me, 6th place goes to the battle between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. If we're talking about legendary rivalries, one of the best in Formula One history can't be left out of this list, one of the first rivalries that became a media sensation. Between a young man who turned the art of discipline into a doctrine and a driver whose lifestyle was all about speed, risk and eccentricity, and definitely women. Two completely opposite personalities, whose paths to Formula One eventually crossed to the point that when they fought for a world title, they left us with a debt. The most memorable battles in the category's history. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the rivalry between Niki Lauda and James Hunt, the story of a battle that began in the lower categories when they first met, but whose outcome was decided in the 1976 season. By that year, Lauda had already been world champion with Ferrari in 1975, but for 1976, Hunt would sign with Ferrari's historic rival, the McLaren team. And that allowed him for the first time to have a car in his hands that was competitive enough to be a contender for the World Drivers' Championship. And this led to their first direct confrontation in Formula One, with Lauda wanting to achieve his second championship and Hunt wanting to chase his dream and his first crown as Formula One world champion. In a battle that had everything: on-track confrontations, disqualifications, an accident at Nürburgring that almost cost Niki Lauda his life, an epic comeback after an injury that caused him severe burns, and a battle that was decided in the last race of the year at the circuit in Japan in the middle of a monumental downpour. Those who had the chance to witness this showdown have no doubt in saying that it was one of the greatest rivalries in the history of Formula One between two drivers with completely opposite personalities who pushed each other to the limit, just as they did in every category where they shared the track. A rivalry in which, in the end, Hunt ended up winning that year in a race where Lauda left the track because he didn't want to face the atrocious conditions on the Fuji circuit at that time. But throughout the duration of this magical rivalry, they gave us emotional moments. However, my problem, particularly with this battle, is that I obviously wasn't around at the time, and it's difficult to follow it with broadcasts of past races because of the mess Formula One has with the broadcasting rights for races from those years. It makes it difficult to have all the material available to watch, one by one, the races from this rivalry. What you'll mostly find are scattered summaries of the 1976 races, but it's hard to really get into this battle just through these sources since the races are extremely summarized. And I'm sure that just like me, 90% of the people who know about this rivalry learned about it thanks to historical accounts, obviously the movie by Roche, or by using the newspaper archives. And that's why I personally rank it so low, because it's really hard to gather audio-visual material to fully enjoy what this battle was. I'm certainly not going to diminish the weight and history of this confrontation, and I truly envy those who witnessed the legendary battle between Niki Lauda and James Hunt, which, at least in my personal ranking, stays in 5th place among legendary rivalries. The 4th spot in this ranking is probably one of the most intense rivalries I've witnessed since I started watching the category full-time in 2004. One that has a completely wild context where they were childhood friends who grew up together, competed together, shared moments with their families. They were rivals in lower categories. All of that was destroyed instantly when they both had cars to fight for the world title. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of the Silver Arrows rivalry that sparked the war-ending Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg's friendship. After several years of friendship, in 2013 fate brought them together in the Mercedes team, which had returned to Formula One in 2010 but had been seriously threatening to sooner or later become a team that would compete for Formula One world titles. And that ended up happening sooner rather than later, because in 2014, with the start of the hybrid era and the new power units, Mercedes not only had a winning car, but they had a dominant car. And the Formula One world title was going to be contested exclusively between its two drivers. Both Rosberg and Hamilton started 2014 by sharing victories and getting along very well when they faced each other on track. But after that year's Monaco Grand Prix, where Hamilton accused Rosberg of causing a yellow flag to secure pole position for that race, that's when everything between them started to fall apart. From that moment, friendship, camaraderie, and family no longer mattered. Only destroying each other on the track did. From there, a rivalry began that became more and more intense. For example, the crash they both had at the Belgian Grand Prix, or when Hamilton disobeyed team orders at the Hungarian Grand Prix, which cost the Mercedes team the victory. And the outcome of this story at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, with Hamilton winning his second World Drivers' title, but along the way we had exciting moments, several battles between the two, and surprising overtakes. A comeback by Lewis Hamilton, which culminated in that 2014 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, earning him his second World Drivers' title. But this only made the rivalry intensify in the following years. When Hamilton won in 2015, he even ended up mocking his teammate on the day of his coronation when he threw the second place cap at him on the winner's podium. But this battle went completely off the rails in 2016 when both of them took this rivalry to its ultimate consequences. With Rosberg not intimidated even wheel to wheel, and with Hamilton, who despite several problems he suffered and accidents he had with Nico Rosberg, managed to take the World Championship fight to the last race of the year, ending in a victory for Nico Rosberg, which was essentially his first and only World Drivers' Championship title in his history and career in Formula One. Those of us who lived through this rivalry witnessed one of the most intense battles ever seen in the history of Formula One, with Mercedes giving them free rein to fight, and the pursuit of a dream prevailed over a lifelong friendship. It's one of the battles I remember most fondly, and it had me completely glued to the TV during those years. It was also one of the first rivalries I was able to enjoy in all its glory. With all the controversy, everything that was going around in the media, everything that was being said, both drivers said in their face-to-face interviews with journalists. That made you want to keep an eye not only on the race, but also on what happened after it. Being a fascinating rivalry that definitely, for those of us who had the chance to experience it, we would only finish each Grand Prix. wishing for more and more of that showdown, which of course we have in full in our series of legendary rivalries, in case you want to check it out in our particular style, which turned out to be the battle of 2014, 2015, and 2016. So ladies and gentlemen, the fourth place in this particular ranking goes to the rivalry between Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg. I must admit that one of the showdowns I've enjoyed the most in history is precisely the battle that perhaps feels the least like a rivalry, since there were few on-track clashes. But the way this battle developed until it ended in two truly historic title deciders is what made me experience this showdown as one of the best I've personally seen in Formula One. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2010 and 2012, Fernando Alonso, who was driving for Ferrari, and Sebastian Vettel, who was a driver for Red Bull, gave us not only a historic season, but also a rivalry that escalated progressively with each race. Until, as I told you, we had an amazing finale. In this context, Ferrari in 2010 was introducing its new driver, Fernando Alonso, who at this point was a two-time world champion and was coming from the Renault team, chasing the dream of becoming a three-time world champion. On the other hand, Red Bull had developed for the first time a car capable of fighting for a world title, but they were surprised by a Brawn GP that snatched the glory from them in 2009. But in 2010, they wanted to take the crown that had slipped away from them a year earlier, and essentially, this 2010 season was a great battle with up to 5 title contenders from 3 different teams: McLaren with Jenson Button and Lewis Hamilton, Ferrari with Fernando Alonso, and Red Bull with Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber. Among those 5, they shared victories throughout 2010, bringing very exciting moments to the season, but also some controversial and tense moments. In the end, we had a World Championship showdown where 4 drivers could mathematically become world champions. This led to a showdown in Abu Dhabi where Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso faced off for the world title for the first time, where, at least in that race, thanks to a huge strategic mistake by Ferrari, they ended up handing the German Red Bull driver his first crown on a silver platter. The battle extended until 2012, a year where, even though Vettel dominated in 2011, the performances became a bit more balanced that season, at least for McLaren and Red Bull, since Ferrari started the year off very poorly with a car that really struggled with qualifying pace. But even so, Fernando Alonso pulled off the epic feat of winning the Malaysian Grand Prix when Ferrari was at its worst, and also achieved the most epic victory of his Formula One career at the Valencia circuit, having won at home after starting completely outside the top 10. Such a battle lasted throughout the entire year, making 2012 a historic season. By all accounts, it gave us several different winners. In the first races, there were many extremely interesting battles, and there were 3 title contenders, since Hamilton was also in the fight at some point. But in the end, this was resolved exclusively between Alonso and Sebastian Vettel in a memorable duel in one of the best season finales in history at the Brazilian Grand Prix. A race with changing track conditions that gave us non-stop drama throughout every lap of that competition. But in the end, everything was resolved in favor of Sebastian Vettel, who achieved his 3rd title in 2012, the Formula One Drivers' World Championship. I completely understand that out of all the rivalries that exist, this is one of the ones with the fewest direct clashes between its 2 contenders, but the way those seasons unfolded made it so that you simply couldn't look away while this rivalry was taking place. The excitement generated by each race, the outcomes of those championships, the tension between the fans of both drivers, and the way each race in 2010 and 2012 was decided made this rivalry absolute cinema where, beyond the particular clash between Vettel and Alonso, every race of those seasons was completely enjoyable. And that makes me remember this particular battle with great fondness, which has been, from my point of view, one of the best in the history of Formula One. And making that chapter about legendary rivalries has been one of the ones I've enjoyed the most. And if you watch both episodes that are available in our playlist for that mini-series, you'll understand why. Both I and many other people around the world value it so highly. The rivalry between Sebastian Vettel and Fernando Alonso, which is why, at least for me, it takes 3rd place in this particular ranking. I know many will be surprised that I put what is considered the mother of all battles in 2nd place. And that's because the rivalry between Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna, one that lasted from 1988 to 1990, is considered by many to be the best and fiercest rivalry in the history of Formula One. And really, how can we deny it? The way this confrontation played out shattered every convention that existed at the time. For context, Ayrton Senna joined the McLaren team in 1988, a McLaren where, for Ayrton, he was the leader, and where by that point he had already won 2 world championships in 1985 and 1986. Senna hadn't won a world title yet, but he already had a strong reputation due to his performances with teams like Lotus and Toleman. And in 1988, Senna was signed by the McLaren team, and at the same time, he arrived with an engine supplier he had already been working with, which was none other than Honda. With which, between the drivers, the team, and the engine supplier, they created a beast of a car that would completely transcend in the very history of motorsport. The McLaren MP44, which was an absurdly dominant car if we compare it to the rest of their rivals. So obviously, the fight for the title ended up being a showdown between both drivers, and in that 1988 season, that's when this rivalry felt intense in terms of competition and not so much because of controversy. The battles that McLaren had, the battles between Senna and Prost were legendary, with palpable tension as they fought for the win and the World Drivers' Championship. And in that 1988 season, the championship duel ended up being decided in favor of Senna, who, at the Japanese Grand Prix, after a magnificent battle between the two, ended up winning his first World Championship. From that point on, camaraderie went on a sabbatical, and all that was left of this rivalry was fire. After a pact was broken by Senna at the 1989 San Marino Grand Prix, the Brazilian and the Frenchman went completely to war. There were heated exchanges between them in press conferences that became the talk of the journalists. Both called their teammate disrespectful, cowardly, or a bad teammate at every race. And race after race, the hatred and contempt they had for each other kept growing gradually, reaching its boiling point at the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix, where an accident in the heat of the title battle ended up being fuel to the fire of this rivalry. This was one of the highest and most controversial points of this battle, with Senna accusing Prost of having made the move that took him out of the race on purpose, and with Prost being accused of using his friendship with the then FIA president Jean-Marie Balestre to favor his own result, which ended in the disqualification of Ayrton Senna in one of the biggest scandals in Formula One history, but this time, in this particular season, in a highly controversial way. The one who took the World Drivers' Championship title would be the Frenchman after his teammate's disqualification. In fact, Prost ended up leaving the McLaren team at the end of that season and joined Ferrari for 1990, and the Italian team gave him the tools to fight against Senna again, but this time they would do it. They became completely different people, once again leaving a tense year, full of controversies, hatred, and disdain between the two, with an ending once again where the controversial tension was present, ending in a deliberate crash by Ayrton Senna, with Alain Prost once again at the Japanese Grand Prix. And this could be a great summary of the rivalry, since it was characterized by controversy, hatred, and the mutual contempt they felt for each other, taking each of their duels to the political arena, where the press echoed every statement that came out of their mouths, where Senna would call Prost a coward, and Prost would practically call him a terrorist, although with completely different words. In the second season, FIA,
ambos, donde Senna no bajaba a Prost de cobarde y donde Prost no lo bajaba prácticamente de terrorista, aunque con palabras completamente diferentes, además de llamarle constantemente un hombre sin honor, haciendo que entre los
was left without honor, making the atmosphere of this battle completely incendiary among the media and fans. And it's true, it's the mother of all battles, and let there be no doubt about that. FIA was left powerless. In the season, the reason it's in the top spot of that ranking is a matter of timing. Because if, like me, you experienced this rivalry, recalling the battles from back then, watching replays of the races from those years, you'll realize that, even though it had some very intense and controversial moments, it's not one that particularly stands out for the number of times they actually went wheel to wheel against each other. The magic of this rivalry doesn't lie in their direct battles, but in the tension they created every time they were on track together, and obviously, this would turn into pure and simple controversy. So it's clear that if you didn't live through that era, if you weren't following the media, the press, or keeping up with the news, both on TV and in print, that talked about this rivalry. In particular, the rivalry can't be felt as intensely as it's described by those who actually lived through it. And that's exactly what happens to me. Watching races from those years, there seemed to be less on-track action than in other battles. Plus, knowing the outcome takes away some intensity. But obviously I understand everything that happened, and I understand why this battle became so important in the history of Formula One, so it's impossible to take away the historical weight it has and that it completely deserves. It's one of the most legendary showdowns ever, and even though I wasn't there, it's impossible to ignore the historical value of the mother of all battles. Although there's one in particular that I enjoy more in my time as a Formula One fan, and that's why the Senna vs. Prost battle takes second place among legendary Formula One rivalries. The rivalry I rank at the top stands out from the rest because it wasn't defined by controversy, what made it magical, and why it surpasses all the others for me. It's that, despite the ferocity of their clashes, it turned out to be a duel of gentlemen, where speed and talent mattered more than dirty tactics or cheap controversy. Ladies and gentlemen, from 1998 to the year 2000, Formula One witnessed the duel of two men who, despite taking their battles to the limit, never lost respect for each other. And that's the best way to sum up the rivalry that Michael Schumacher and Mika Häkkinen gave us, two drivers who came into the 1998 season with a dream to fulfill. Mika wanted his first world title after joining the category in 1994 and being with the McLaren team through a long restructuring process. Meanwhile, Schumacher wanted to fulfill his dream of becoming world champion with Ferrari, a dream that slipped away from him in 1997 at the hands of the Canadian Jacques Villeneuve. But life would bring these two talented drivers together that season, where both enjoyed having a competitive car, and this allowed them to take their battle for the title to a level rarely seen in this category. They had a 1998 campaign characterized by the fact that this duel was a head-to-head power-to-power battle between men and their machines. Obviously, there was controversy, like in the British Grand Prix, where Schumacher served a stop-and-go penalty after practically finishing the race. Or the 1998 Belgium accident between Schumacher and Coulthard, where the German accused him of doing it on purpose to take him out of the race. There were tense moments, especially between the Ferrari and McLaren teams, but what really stood out was the fierce head-to-head battle between them, where both Häkkinen and Schumacher seemed to greatly enjoy their rivalry. In 1998, the winner was Häkkinen in a showdown at the Japanese Grand Prix. And although in 1999 the battle had to be paused due to Schumacher's injury at the British Grand Prix, in the year 2000 we had the absolute peak of this rivalry. With both having competitive cars and both as two-time world champions, both were chasing the dream of becoming three-time world champions. Believe me, the way they fought that battle in 2000 was top-notch. Pure cinema. Legendary showdowns, wheel-to-wheel battles. Extremely exciting. Even the qualifying sessions ended up being a spectacle when these two faced each other on track. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what has made this rivalry transcend over all these years, because of the legendary way in which this showdown ended up taking shape. Which is why I personally choose it as my favorite rivalry, definitely the one I enjoy the most. It wasn't really about two drivers forcing each other off the track or a rivalry fueled entirely by controversy. None of that, but simply the skill, the speed, and the way both drivers fought. That's what made this such a special rivalry and definitely my favorite showdown of all time. As a Formula One fan, it gave us 3 years of absolute battles. One of the best overtakes in Formula One history, but two drivers who, despite that rivalry and intensity, never stopped respecting each other and never stopped getting excited about facing each other again. So ladies and gentlemen, the duel of Schumacher versus, which gave us years and years and gave us 3 years of battles, rivalries in Formula One. But ladies and gentlemen, with that we finish the top 7 legendary rivalries in Formula One. But this is where I ask you, how would you personally organize the top? What do you think is the greatest rivalry in history? Also, is there any rivalry you'd personally add to this list that we haven't discussed? Let me know all your opinions in the comments section. That's all from me, I'm signing off. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications so you'll know when I'm uploading a new video, and share this with your friends. I also invite you to follow us on our Instagram and Twitter accounts. The links will be in the description of this video, and I'll see you soon for more content here on the Skyline Racing channel. Thank you for tuning in, and see you later.